Well, the verse that I'm excited to share with you guys today is one of my favorite verses because it's really the gospel contained in one verse. And that's in Romans chapter 3, verse 26. Let me just read it to you, and then we'll just walk through it a little bit together. So Paul, in Romans chapter 3, verse 26 says, God presented him to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so that he would be just and justify the one who has faith in Jesus. So when you look at this verse, like I said, it is the gospel contained in one verse, and we see that as we go through it. So it begins that God presented him. Well, who's the him there? The him is Jesus. God sent Jesus as his physical representation on the earth. God revealed himself to us in Jesus, and he said he did it to demonstrate his righteousness. Well, what is that word righteousness? We don't use it a whole lot. That word righteousness is a word that we use to talk about God's holiness, the idea that God is perfect, that God is sinless. And that's a problem for us because we're not. We are sinful. We aren't perfect. And because of that, we are all deserving of God's wrath because he is perfect and righteous. And so it kind of puts us in this position where God's got to decide what he's going to do with us because of our sin. And so we go on, it says, God presented him, Jesus, to demonstrate his righteousness, his holiness, his perfection at the present time, so that, and that phrase, so that there is a purpose clause showing the purpose of why God demonstrated, showed Jesus to demonstrate his righteousness. And it says, so that he would be just and justify the one who has faith in Jesus. And so this is why I say that the gospel in a whole is found in this verse, because it's showing what God did in Jesus, that he upheld his holiness by being just toward our sin. He punished our sin. He passed down a just sentence for our sin, but he also justified our sin. He showed his love in that he provided the necessary sacrifice for our sin. And I think that is the gospel. And where do we see that? Well, we see that demonstrated in the cross. In the cross. That word demonstrate literally means to point to. So God pointed to his righteousness in the cross because it was in the cross that God was just in that he punished sin, but he also justified us by sending Jesus to take that punishment in himself. So now Paul says, the one who has faith in Jesus is made right with God. We are justified before God. As a matter of fact, the word here for just and justify is the same root as the word righteousness, that God gives us his righteousness in Jesus. He's just, and that he passed a just sentence punishing our sin. He justified us by sending Jesus to take that punishment in himself. And now all of us who put our faith and trust in Jesus can have new life. Here is good news, but it's only good news if we believe. And that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by Pastor Tim Keller. He says that there's two things in life that we are always going to be wrong about. The first is we're always going to be wrong about our sin. It's always going to be worse and deeper than we can imagine. And we're always going to be wrong about God's love, because God's love covers us more and accepts us more fully than we'll ever truly comprehend. And we see both of those things embodied in the cross. The depth of our sin that made the cross necessary, and the depth of God's love that was on display there. So in the cross, God pointed to his righteousness in Jesus by making Jesus the sacrifice for our sin while accepting the sentence that our sin deserved. The gospel in one verse.